I want to take some time to thank the family right now for coming as well too. Andy, Ann, Jen, appreciate it. Dave, I think you're probably considered family by now. Coming all the way from Maine, there's a group of them, so I appreciate you guys a lot. And what am I forgetting? Men's room's on the left, women's on the right. Joe Dillon will be signing autographs later. Joe Dillon, thank you for the PA system. Adam Kashundi, thank you for his PA system and for spinning records. Greg's collection of records is available for you guys to peruse. Pick out a record, ask Andy to play it. It's something that Greg loved, was sharing his music with all of us. So I'm going to introduce some people as we go. There's a few that have expressed interest in saying a few words. At that point, once it's done, anybody's welcome to come up if you've got a story to share, a joke to tell, a cheers to make, a toast. Please don't be shy. We have the bar here until 5. We just kind of said food at 2, but you guys, we can stay up here and talk until 5 if we have to. Like I said, there's a lot of good stories, so make sure to pass them around. Greg is here in spirit and in remains. He's in his box right now. It is cherry wood. Doug King crafted that by hand over the last week, and we're really grateful for that, Doug. Thank you. It's beautiful. He would love it. Without further ado, Ingrid and Claire would like to do a little introduction.
Anna.
Oh, and Anna, excuse me.
You can. I'm not going to move. So.
Today we have gathered, and we see that the cycles of life continue. We've been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now, we bring our minds together as one, and we give greetings and thanks to each other as people.
We are all thankful to our mother, the earth, for she gives us all that we need for life. She supports our feet as we walk about upon her. It gives us joy that she continues to care for us, as she has from the beginning of time. To our mother, we send greetings and thanks.
The water. We give thanks to all the waters of the world for quenching our thirsts and providing us with strength. Water is life. We know its power in many forms: waterfalls and rain, mist and streams, rivers and oceans. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to the Spirit of water.
With one mind, we turn to honor and thank all of the food plants. We harvest them from the garden. And since the beginning of time, the grains, vegetables, beans, and berries have helped the people survive. Many other living things draw strength from them too. We gather all the plant foods together as one, and we send them a greeting of thanks.
We gather our minds together to send greetings and thanks to all the animal life in the world. They have many things to teach us as people. We are honored by them when they give up their lives, so we may use their bodies as food for our people. We see them near our homes and in the deep forests. We are glad they are still here, and we hope that it will always be so.
The trees. We now turn our thoughts to the trees. The earth has many families of trees who have their own instructions and use. Some provide us with shelter and shade, others with fruit, beauty, and other useful things. Many people of the world use a tree as a symbol of peace and strength. With one mind, we greet and thank tree life.
We are all thankful to the powers we know as the four winds. We hear their voices in the moving air as they refresh us and purify the air we breathe. They help us to bring the change of seasons. From the four directions, they come, bringing us messages and giving us strength. With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks to the four winds. Now our minds are one.
Beautiful, thank you. Andy, tell us how Greg was.
Hey all, can you hear me okay? I feel like Steven Tyler up here.
You like a little Steven Tyler show?
I'm not as... Watch this. There we go. Okay. I think I'm good. I'd like to start by thanking everybody for showing up here. This is quite a reception. And the people who organized it, there's been a ton of time and effort devoted to this, and so I'd like to thank all the efforts from the organizers to the attendees and everybody who showed up here. I know that Mike Randolph and Carrie put a lot of effort into this, and I'm sure that the others have as well. I was asked to say a few words about Greg's early life, which is a daunting task because Mike only gave me 45 minutes, and so I have to keep it within this 45-minute time frame. And so I'm going to keep it brief. Normally I lecture in 1 hour and 30-minute blocks, but this one's only going to be a 45-minute block. So we'll start from the beginning. Greg was born in 1976 in the summer in Salt Lake City. And he was yellow and jaundiced and looked like hell when he was born. But luckily, even though it was scorching hot, it was over 100 degrees, there was a lone survivor of a Wasatch snowflake that drifted down Little Cottonwood Canyon, across the valley, and got Greg in the nostril. And it not only cured his jaundice, but forever infected him with a love of mountains, snow, and all things physical, as people can attest to here. Shortly afterwards, a year later, my family moved to the East Coast state of Maine, where we lived in a beautiful rural area that shaped our lives forever. We did not live in a neighborhood or have friends within walking distance, so Greg and I entertained ourselves playing in dirt, putting frog eggs in buckets, snowshoeing, sledding, and other things that young lads did in Maine, all of which generally ended in fistfights and beating the crap out of each other. Apparently our parents really liked this idea of beating the crap out of each other because they actually bought us a pair of boxing gloves for Christmas one year. And even though I am 18 months older than Greg was, I was bigger, stronger, and faster. Greg never shied away from a good match up in our bedroom. And the only rule was we couldn't punch each other in the face. He always lost. So I would like to claim... I know, but Dave has witnessed it, and we actually had plaster falling out of ceilings. But I would like to claim that I helped shape Greg into the tough MF that he was. But I bet if Greg were here, he'd probably correct some of my details. Greg always marched to the beat of his own drummer. My friends and I all played team sports. There's several of us here today. And Greg dabbled in those team sports, but he was in left field, both literally and figuratively. Rather, Greg preferred the blood, sweat, and tears of individual sports. After not submitting homework assignments during his entire freshman year of public school, my parents sent him to a nearby private school where the teachers could keep closer tabs on Greg. And although he was sort of beaten into submission by wearing a coat and tie every day, imagine that, Private school couldn't tame Greg, as he made his own Nordic and Alpine ski teams there, of which he was the only member. As a young teenager, he completed the legendary Gatineau ski race in Quebec. He was the youngest competitor to do so in the history of the race, and he even completed it after flirting with hypothermia induced from sleeping on the snow in a paper-thin sleeping bag with no pad. Greg also managed to date every young woman in the school who was taller than 5 foot 10 inches tall and could have pursued a career in modeling. New page. Yeah, thanks, Mike. During this time is when Greg developed a sparkle in his eye over alpine skiing. Greg grew up ski racing at a mountain named Sugarloaf in Maine, and my dad lived to ski deep powder in the steep slopes of the American and Canadian West. Fortunately for us, my dad brought his family along on all of his ski trips. My dad used to clarify with a wry smirk on his face, "Kids, this is not a vacation. This is a ski trip." This left an indelible mark on all of us, and we knew the expectations of eating free Sara Lee muffins at the Continental Breakfast at the Super 8, and then skiing like every day was our last day on Earth. My dad was never happier than when he was in the mountains, and Greg inherited this. During his senior year in high school, Greg firmly declared that he was not going to college. Rather, he was moving to Montana. When my dad questioned why Greg wanted to opt out of college, Greg proudly retorted, "Dad, you made me this way." Greg was never happier than when he was in the mountains. When we visited Greg at Alta, where he moved during his first winter out of high school, Greg was finally living his dream, complete with long, scraggly hair, dirty ski jacket and pants that drove my mother nuts, and an ample amount of double-fisted burritos at the Albion Grill. I was lucky enough to share time in the mountains with Greg, and although he was younger than I am, he was my mountain mentor. I couch surfed at his place in Missoula one winter, where he showed me the beauty and his infectious love of Snowbowl and its surroundings. To extend our ski season, we traveled to South America during the austral winter, where we climbed and skied 2 large volcanoes, one of which provided us the endless ski run. I'll never forget the look on Greg's face at the bottom of that run. Greg even employed his high school Spanish with the beautiful Aquafresh toothpaste girls who were clothed in pure white, skin-tight one-piece ski suits in pursuit of dental perfection. At the end of one of our trips, we skied onto the top of a resort in Chile where there was a ski race. We spoke with the race organizer, who also happened to own an upscale fondue restaurant at the base of the mountain. He posed a challenge to Greg. If you can race the course on a pair of wooden skis with leather bindings without falling, dinner and drinks were on the restaurant owner. Greg not only accepted the challenge, but aced it in a pair of Levi 501s and a flannel shirt while doing a death crouch to the bottom of the course in 3-foot icy ruts. With very mixed emotions, I'd like to close by saying that over the past few years, Greg and I didn't keep up with each other. In the back of my head, I hope that Greg was not only doing well, but pursuing his endeavors with the same enthusiasm, perseverance, and grit that I knew in years past. I wanted Greg to be happy and find peace, whatever that may look like and felt like to him. I feel incredibly fortunate to reconnect with Greg's friends whom I've met in the past and connect with new friends whom I have not met before. I am eternally grateful for everyone's welcoming reception here, understanding of our family imperfections, and most of all, injection of humor and fun into a crappy situation. I have greatly enjoyed hearing and learning and knowing that Greg pursued not only work and recreation that benefited him, but also that he selflessly advocated for initiatives to improve the greater community of Missoula. And with that, thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing about later chapters in Greg's life. Thank you.
That was great, Andy. Thank you. Dave Williams. The Dave Williams.
Thanks, Mike. Well, thank you. I think the first thing we have to do is lower expectations for my speech, because that was pretty good. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is David Williams, and I am a longtime friend of Greg, the Seitz family, and the Thibodeau family. A long time ago, I worked for a guy, and whenever I walked into his office, he'd pick his head up, look at me, and say, "Williams, be brief and be gone." So that's my plan for this speech here. I'm going to channel that advice and share a few quick stories about Greg and how great growing up with him was back in Maine. Greg was my first friend and my oldest friend. We met at age 5 and 6 respectively. We had Mrs. Mullaney together in first grade. And that's really where things kicked off. But like anything that goes on for a lifetime, our friendship was not without challenges. The first test of our friendship came pretty quickly, just 1 year later. As second grade wound down and summer break was just around the corner, I was informed that due to, and this is a quote, an excessive amount of ants in my pants, I would not, in fact, be moving on to third grade, but rather giving second grade another shot. I did not really care too much about repeating. I did have ants in my pants, and I hated sitting quietly at my desk, but I distinctly remember the fear of not being in the same grade as my best friend. I was afraid that something would change, that Greg might find new cool third graders to hang out with. And it was my biggest fear, but summer came, and luckily that never happened. In fact, quite the opposite. We spent every free moment together for the next 13 years. We were on the same youth sports team, and later the same high school sports teams, and we did everything together. We water skied, snow skied, biked, hiked, camped, and rode motorcycles all through Maine and New England. Greg was a year and 4 days older than I am, so our parents just merged our birthdays, and we had one birthday party for both of us every summer in July. Every Christmas, I would call him or he would call me at 9, and we would compare what we got. I feel like he always had cool stuff. Mine was questionable. But we had that tradition, and in fact, we did that well into our 20s and maybe even our early 30s. It was less frequent, but we still did that call. If I had to use a single word to describe growing up with Greg, it would have been awesome. We spent so much time together, at some point Greg stopped being a friend and just became a brother, which was great, although it was not without its drawbacks. We'd bicker and do things deliberately to annoy one another. We'd often disagree on what we wanted to do, or in many cases didn't want to do. And Greg was always plotting something, and often those plans were pretty bad ideas. He once convinced me to rollerblade with him to the next town in the middle of the night to buy a bag of circus peanuts at a 24-hour 7-Eleven. He assured me it would not take that long, and our parents would never know. Needless to say, none of that was correct, and both sets of parents were waiting for us when we finally made it home. And looking back, it was probably one of his safer ideas. Usually they involved homemade explosives and accelerants. But I could never say no to Greg. He was nothing if not persistent. And some of you have heard this, but he had a special tactic he'd use on me whenever I was dug in and didn't want to go along with one of his plans. Greg would look at me and he'd get real serious and he'd say, "But Dave, we used to take baths together." And that was it. I always went along. He always won. He literally bat 1,000. So with that, I'll be gone. But before I go, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to Greg for being a best friend. Thank you to his family for treating me like I always belonged. And thank you to his great friends here in Montana. You have been so gracious and generous with your time and help. And I am very happy I came out here and met you all and spent time with you. Thank you.
Well done, Dave. Wow. Yeah, well, I can relate, Dave, on the being a brother from another mother. So, I want to take this time right now to tell you all that you look absolutely fabulous out there. So, really did it well, getting dressed up and coming out. So, thank you, and I appreciate it so much. So, I know everybody's got a lot better things to do on a Saturday, especially during elk hunting season. I'm going to raise a glass because it's time. If you've got one. To Greg. All right, we're not done though. I believe we would be calling that just getting started. So, next up. Ian. As a frame of reference, the first time I really spent time with Ian and Greg together, Ian hatched a scheme to walk across the top of the Chinese wall. Everybody else walks below it and takes pictures of it up above and all the mountain goats. Ian and Greg decided that it'd be way better to be with the mountain goats. Those are one of those moments that I probably wanted to kill Greg for inviting me along, but I'm really happy that he talked me into it and I went through with it because memories will last a lifetime. So here's Ian.
Thanks, Mike. I'll never forget that trip. And neither will Damien's bunions. Sorry, Damien. I've got a prepared statement I'd like to read. Not really. No, I'll figure it out. I'll let you know.
Here to help you.
Okay, so I consider this job, talking about people that have passed away, big shoes to fill, especially today, because Greg was really great at this. And so, try and picture me in the most spotless baby blue suit a person can find at a secondhand store in Drummond, looking like the best dressed five and dimer you have ever seen. And I will channel my best Greg Seitz. I'm also going to make this easier on myself by mainly reading things that Greg wrote. And just for the record, I put this together at 2:30 in the morning after going to Charlie's, so I hope it turns out all right. I hope I don't touch on any topics that are too sensitive. I had a really big regret. And that was I had a burning question to ask Greg that I was waiting to ask him at the right moment. And I'll talk more about that in a second. 30 years ago, I was in my first few weeks of working at the Albion Grill at Alta. And Jen showed up one day. She can tell you that story if she wants to. And shortly after, she said, I think my little brother's going to join us. And he came in a couple of weeks later, and he literally looked like Spicoli from Fast Times. And I was like, he looks cool. And we were both wide-eyed kids who wanted to explore the limits of skiing. We didn't really know anything. And Andy kind of brought this up, but part of the thing we bonded over that it took us years to admit was we actually sucked at sports. And we had been kind of affected by that growing up and sucking. And at some point we put skis on and we're like, actually I can probably do this. And so we had that bond that we could be like quietly between us. Yet the only reason I'm doing this is because I can't catch a ball. And we worked all year together at the Albion Grill. A number of us are here today. It was an amazing experience. At the end of the year, me and Greg decided to go on a road trip. And we left Utah and we went on a 6-week road trip doing nothing but skiing, eating, and sleeping in the dirt, which was at the time the things that we were best at. And we ended up, we went to Nevada, to Jasper, Alberta, all over the continent. And it was a really fun experience, a lot of freedom. And so Greg, one of the things that impressed me was that obviously he was a good skier. One of the things that maybe a lot of people don't realize about him is somehow he managed to keep getting better as he got older. And we used to kind of bounce off each other and stuff for years, and eventually it was just like, I can't keep up with that guy anymore. And he was such a good skier because he cared so much about that craft, and he skied with all of his heart. After we lived in Utah, I moved back to Montana. I came back to college. Greg stayed in Utah, and we stayed in touch. I'd go visit, and we'd talk on the phone. And I worked on him for a couple of years, suggesting he would like Missoula if he had ever had enough of Utah. And after a couple of years, he decided to give it a try. So to make a long story short, we had many life experiences together, both things we were proud of and also disasters we would rather not remember. We went from two kids who could barely make it up a skin track to fulfilling our dreams, skiing to Canada along the most challenging lines we could will ourselves to do. We got older, but only imperceptibly wiser. And we found a way to make the life that we wanted to happen. At some point, our lives were entwined to the extent that our families were entwined, and we knew the Seitzes knew us. I called my sister to tell her that Greg had died, and we had a long talk, and she was remembering Andy, Greg's brother, his wedding. And I said, "Oh my God, you got an invite to that. How did you do that?" I didn't. Like, and she goes, "Ian, I was Greg's date." And I go, "That son of a bitch, she didn't ask me." And so anyway, flash forward 25 years. And when Greg died, it was like I wanted to use the word a shock, but it wasn't a shock. I felt like I'd already read the script to the plot, and it was this really weird feeling. And he had talked about the risks that he'd take for years, and it's almost like he foreshadowed a lot of his destiny. And something he wrote on Facebook a number of years ago occurred to me, and I had to go find it. And it was kind of one of those things he would put out there, and you could read it as Greg explaining to everybody else why he lived the life he did, especially why he returned to working in the woods after breaking his neck the first time. But you could also read it like Greg working it out internally with himself, why he chose to do so. And this is what he wrote. He said, "My decision to return to the woods was not one that I took lightly. Falling timber appears on its surface to be the problem I've created for myself. I see that and I get it. But somewhere along the way, when my other options had evaporated, it also appeared to be the solution, a thought that's both frightening and liberating. I really don't know, and I don't give it too much thought now that the decision is made. Maybe you'll find yourself in a similar position sometime, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's a matter of knowing the risks and accepting or rejecting them. That is what I believe. That is why I choose heroes and role models unconventionally, who aren't professional athletes or celebrities. I want to thank them and you, my heroes, for showing the way just by living. You're living out your dreams on your terms, and that doesn't come easy." So I've tried to see Greg's death not as an unavoidable accident, but as part of the life that he chose to live, and it was the life that most fit who he was. It was like he wrote the script of his life from beginning to end, part comedy and part tragedy. And I consider it the ultimate freedom in life to get to choose your destiny and live life on your own terms, risk and reward included. So that's been somewhat comforting. Okay, this is my favorite thing he ever wrote. A lot of you will remember this. 7 or 8 years ago, he posted it on Facebook. He'd written it for Steo blog. It's an essay called Snowball, the Lost and Discarded. And this was the other thing that explained to me, that helped me understand exactly why Greg was who he was, which was amazing and difficult. He wrote, Montana Snowball, presiding over the Missoula Valley, is a time warp, a curiosity, a double fall line, a humility, an acceptance, and an education. Snowball is the lost and the discarded. Bamboo, stumps, and brush, secondhand double chairlifts, and groomers and government surplus earth movers, known better for its wood-fired pizza oven and Bloody Mary than its long, sustained tree runs. Its clientele is, as the man once said, college kids, drunks, ex-wives, mooches, and fly fishing guides, by which he meant everybody. Had the man looked in on another day, he might have said surgeons and smoke jumpers and professors and role models, and he would have meant the same thing. We all pay a price for the life we choose. This is still Greg, whether we endure corporate jobs and office parks, long lift lines, underpaid service work, or having our skiing relegated to weekends and vacations, each of us makes daily sacrifices. Every day cannot be a powder day, and at Snowball, most days aren't. Taken individually, these complaints are valid. Snowball is family owned and operated, and at times the relationship between the owners and the public gets antagonistic. The chairlifts break, sometimes straining riders for hours. But I prefer to love the place for the sum of its parts. It's like giving broken instruments to an orchestra, which proceeds to play Mozart. The performance might not be perfect, but it's unique, and seeing as I couldn't expect any better for myself, I wouldn't complain. And he continues, once while riding the lift with my late friend Matt Gibson, after the holidays, he asked me whether I celebrated with family. I told him no, that holiday travel was too hectic, and I'd rather visit family other times of the year. Risking cliche, he replied, this place is like a big family holiday anyhow. Some family you adore, some you'd rather avoid. You get to catch up with your cousins and whoever else, and there's that weird uncle who always had an odor. And even if you don't think it at the time, it's great to see him too. He continues, Montana Snowball is what it is and doesn't try to be anything else. If that kind of skiing appeals to you, then come pay a visit someday. If nothing else, you'll find the locals to be colorful, and chances are one of them will show you around. This part's important. Just don't complain or make excuses, because nobody wants to hear it. Okay. Now back to the burning question. It took me many years to solve one of the mysteries of this amazing written reflection of Greg's life in Snowball. It was fairly recently. I was waiting for the right moment. I was reading a book Greg had recommended many years ago, Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. And the opening paragraphs and the characters seem familiar. You see, Snowball, the Lost and Discarded, is loosely based on Cannery Row. And I discovered one of the riddles Greg would throw our way. I couldn't wait to bust out the question to Greg at the right moment. I was expecting it when he wasn't expecting it, and get him to lean back and look at the sky and cackle like a madman, because that solved one of the mysteries he sows. He loved it when people could see beyond the veneer and catch the hidden meaning of things in a way that he could so easily do. You see, Cannery Row is a story about a bunch of miscreants and societal dropouts who live in a drunken pile and have nothing to show for themselves but the entertainment that their deviant personalities provide. The plot of the story is they are trying to throw their friend the biggest, most thoughtful surprise party to show their appreciation for him. They can't quite quit drinking the jug of homemade wine long enough to do anything but fuck up the effort and burn down the house. So appreciate it or not, this is the way Greg saw all of us that knew him and lived life here at Snowball. He saw all of us, himself included, as a bunch of outcasts who have no other claim to life achievement than we have found a place that satisfies our need for amusement and thrill, despite it being far from the fringe of what any normal person would consider acceptable. Now, eventually, the miscreants of Cannery Row get their shit together enough to have a party to remember, and that is what we are doing here today. So the challenge for us is to pick up the pieces and try to enjoy the special thing that he was part of making. The ski runs he was putting his heart into cutting are one of a kind. They are not easy, nor user-friendly, nor would you find them in any normal ski area. But if you put in the time and keep after it, you'll someday solve the mystery and see the beauty of the line for what it is. Our biggest challenge is to do that with a smile, knowing that he gave it all to make it happen. And so I'd like if you join me into thanking him for making it possible. Thank you, Greg.
Very nice, Ian. Thank you. Next up, one of Greg's longtime saw partners. Long enough to the point where they would not work with anybody else anymore. Kind of his work wife, I guess, in that way. Sir Walter Randolph Chitwood III. Hailing from the southern part of East Missoula.
Hello, everyone. Well, put me at cleanup, I see. That's going to be hard to beat, you know. The cleanup hitter. Okay, good. Greg and I would always joke when we were on fires. They're like, where are y'all from? I'm from Missoula. He's from East Missoula. He took heavy pride in that. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome y'all and thank you for being here. We're all here for Greg, but you guys are here for Greg. He meant something to each one of you, and that's why we're here. Extremely unfortunate circumstance, but he did what he did, and he loved life. And no better place to commemorate him than right here. I'd like to extend my condolences once again to the Seitz Thibodeau crew, Dave Williams. I'm very sorry. And I would like to extend it to the other family, all of you guys. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come celebrate Greg. He's stoked. I'm stoked. We're all stoked. So I'm a little perturbed, though, because I hope to never get in front of a crowd like this again and talk. Because Greg, thankfully, one time, this is 2017, we were on the Sapphire Complex fire out of Beavertail. And we were up in the mountains cutting one day, and I was cutting, and I could see him over there talking to the head safety officer for the team. I was like, what are those guys conjuring up over there? And he'd look over, and I'd look over, and he'd be like, ha, ha, ha. I got you. So after I had cut a couple trees, I came up, and he's like, well, the safety officer said, well, Randolph, fortunately, your fallen partner here volunteered you for something. I was like, Jesus, what'd you get us into now, Seitz? They wanted us to lead the safety briefing in the morning. And there was probably about the same number of folks. Maybe there was more. And I was like, thanks, Seitz. And he's like, ha, ha, in his demeanor. So the next morning, we got called up there. We kind of got pointed out to come lead the safety briefing. And for the rest of the afternoon prior, we had talked about like how we were going to address everything. And one of the things that Greg had, which I rarely called him Greg, so it's kind of weird, but one of the things that we had talked about that he really emphasized on was keeping things light in extremely stressful situations. And we had been in numerous stressful situations, cutting trees, skiing, doing, living life. But Greg was real adamant about passing that along. And that was like his focal point of his part of the speech. And we continue to do that for years. And we go into these, we call them, sometimes if we were in lodgepole fiascos, where you look and you're like, Jesus. Everything's crossed up and it's a puzzle, and it'll all reveal itself, and it did. It always did. And so I've taken that to heart. I want to pass that on to you guys, because I want in your daily endeavors throughout life is sometimes when you think it's a stressful situation, try to keep it light. Greg would want that from you guys. So there was many adventures throughout the years, and I don't really have anything written down. I just have some bullet points, so I don't kind of go off the deep end here. But one of the first major times that we spent a lot of time cutting trees together was Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And I was sitting at Charlie's, I'm watching this thing brewing, and I was like, quit calling me Finley. It's probably Mark Albert and Finley calling me. Check in on me. But either way, so in 2005, I'm sitting there at Charlie's having a beer, and I'm like, this hurricane's going to be pretty significant. So I called Greg. I'm like, hey, do you want to go on an adventure? And of course, he's like, well, where are we going? What are we doing? And I presented it to him, and he said, that sounds like a horribly great idea. Let's do it. So we left, packed up. A couple days later, he ended up getting, some folks together. I got some folks together, and then we traveled down south, and we spent 5 to 6 weeks down there cutting extremely sketchy trees that were pressure loaded from the hurricane. He should have almost been, he should have almost seen my demise one day when I had a big strap pull loose, a barber chair, and he was actually sitting there watching me, and I put in my back cut, and the strap released, boom, landed right at my toes, and I had all this slash behind me. I couldn't get out of the way. The first person I yelled at or said something, I said, Seitz, you think that would have killed me? He's like, absolutely. And so, from day one, we kind of started keeping it light, and but then, he believed in me on that adventure, and then I believed in him in a lot of other adventures. He'd say, well, I know this guy. He's got this job over there. He's going to bid on in Washington. You want to take a boat to some remote place and go cut trees? It's like, absolutely. So we did that, and, cutting on the interstate, one of the legacies that if y'all don't know, if you drive west from Missoula towards Lookout Pass, and you get through the curves past St. Regis, from Henderson exit onto Hagen, you'll see a bunch of stumps in the median, and on the right and left, east-westbound lane. Well, that was mainly Greg and I, and I was like, there's 18-wheelers rolling by, and they won't close both lanes. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, of course you asked me to come join you on this. So he believed in me, I believed in him. And we continue to keep it light, you know. That's what you got to do, you know, in these stressful situations. So, you know, Seitz he was part of my family. He was the first human outside of immediate family to ever hold my son Charlie, and he called and he was like, "Hey, I'm in the neighborhood." We just got out of the hospital, got back home. "Hey, I'm in the neighborhood." I couldn't decline and say, "Come back another time." I was like, "Absolutely, come over." So he came over, and I'm a little bummed that I didn't. Well, I'm actually really bummed that I didn't get to take a picture. I asked Paige if she had taken a picture, and there's just mental memories. But he was one of the first he was the first friend outside of immediate family to hold my son. And so Charlie knew him throughout the years as Uncle Seitz. And when I'd call him when we were on these trips away, either on fire or doing these other tree cutting jobs, he always wanted to talk to Uncle Seitz, probably sometimes more than me. But, you know, he was family. And it's a huge hit to our family. It's a huge hit to all of y'all. He's in a place that we don't want him to be, but it's a place he deserves to be. He owned what he did, and he took responsibility. He was a hell of a faller. I just want to pass this on. About like Greg, right? So he was stoked. He was stoked on life. The last interaction that we had was up in Eureka when we were on this fire. It was actually Labor Day, and we got to the fire, and we looked at the IAP, the Incident Action Plan. We look at it, and we're like, oh, we're not on Division Charlie. We're not on, and we start fumbling through it, and we realize we're on no division. And what that means is you look at the demob list, and there we were, 039, Headwaters Forestry. We were going home, and we were both stoked. We had a good run. We got to spend 41 days on fire this year, too, a role in no man's land, Idaho. And he loved working with the fire crews and, like, learning their ideas. And, you know, everybody was always fascinated about how we sharpen, you know. And so we'd give these tutorials, and but he was stoked. I mean, he got off that roll. He was like, oh. And he'd have that pause, you know. He's trying to come up with, like, the words. He's like, I feel like I'm stealing the best work in the country from you, Randolph. Come join me at Snowball. I was like, as soon as I get done with some of these contracts, I'll be up there, bro. He's like, it's just, he was cutting ski runs. It was just what he did. He loved it. And so we can, you know, we're obviously all taken back by, you know, him passing, but he was up there. He was stoked. He had, you know, a pocket full of cash that he didn't get to enjoy. He knew that he was going to have a sick month, maybe even longer, up in Canada, going up to Revelstoke with Carrie, doing his thing, hanging out at the Aquatic Center. I mean, yeah. Can you imagine? Yeah. He didn't want to go to the bar. He wanted to hang out at the Aquatic Center. That's where all the fun, you know, kind of happened. And he was stoked to ski. his lines that he has cut over the years and the ones that he was cutting now, and he wanted all of y'all to have the stoke. You know, because TV's rad. A lot of us have been skiing them for years before there was anything up there, but now there's actually lines that can open it up more to more people, and that's a legacy he'll always have. And yeah, you know, just every time we did this, every time we would get to my house or I drop him off at his house from a fire or an adventure, you know, we always gave each other a hug, a big hug. I mean, it's just look at each other in the eyes, and we're like, we did it, we made it through. The best gift he ever gave me was a gift of keeping me safe, pointing out things so I could come home to my family, and that's something I'll always treasure. So, you know, when you get a chance and you're like, should I hug this person? Hug them, you know? Every time, you know? And Seitz would want you to do that. So, but with that, I'll pass the mic on to Mike. And thanks for coming. We're going to have a hell of a celebration today to celebrate Greg.
Thanks, Randolph. Good work. The next person I had on the list was Win. How you feeling?
Thanks for organizing, Mike, and all who are responsible for putting this together. Just to quickly say a few things while I feel like I can speak. A lot of good humor out there. I was almost picturing this as like a toast, like I'm talking to Greg because it feels like he is here. And so, I was thinking of questions I might ask him if he were here. Can you articulate why you thought it was a good idea to ski to Canada? Why, when you Nordic ski, do you wear these giant wool lumberjack pants and a giant wool coat, and you disappear out of sight of me within like the first mile? Why does that happen? And then also, Seitz, is now the time to explain why on day 3 of a 3-week ski tour through the Wind River Range, this was the day to lose the tent stakes. Greg was something else. He really was. And I, too, am one of the Albion Grill former inmates. We did our time there. We had a few family teams there. My brother and I were there, Greg and Jen, and there were a few other people, too, so we had a great crew. But that was when I met Greg in 1995. He was 19, and I was 28, so I was quite a bit older. And basically, Greg and I figured out together somehow and lived how to backcountry ski. And we did our first big trip together, and I was just calculating the numbers that I might have a stat that I don't know if anyone here can match, which is that I have slept in close proximity to Greg, like next to Greg in a tent, for over 4 months total time. So we spent a lot of nights in the tent, and just a raging blizzard or whatever the circumstances were. Greg was always up for anything. In our adventures together, I often was the instigator. I'd be the guy who came up with an idea, but then inevitably, once we got out there and realized how crazy it was, Greg was the one who ensured that we actually survived. So Greg was kind of the closer. He was super strong. And I can think of several times when he did save my bacon, for sure, out there. He's the kind of guy who would just, you call him up, hey, I think we should, spend the winter skiing around Yellowstone. How's that sound? You're like, okay, yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of consideration, but so we had some amazing times together. Somebody said the word physical about Greg, the physicality of Greg, and that is so true. Just everything about him to me. He was such a physical guy. He loved physical things. If you go into his house, it's just filled with all of these amazing old saws and clothing and real hard physical things from the outdoors. And he was an amazing guy. I'm so glad that I randomly met him back in his so-called Spicoli days, when there was hair. But I was lucky enough, about 10 years ago I saw Greg in West Yellowstone. Hadn't seen him in a while. He came down. I was there Nordic skiing. And I thought I was in pretty good shape, and Greg showed up in his logger pants and just completely dusted me, just was off in his own event. And I didn't see him again until this past December. Last year, 2022, I happened to be coming through town, saw him for the first time in 10 years. And I literally trained the last 10 years to make sure that would not happen again. And so he took me up to Lubrecht, and I was able to put the herd on, double poling uphill. So that was like, in the way that Greg and I communicated, that was, he didn't say anything, but I knew that he knew. Yeah, I just wanted to recognize the Seitz and Thibodeau families for being here. And in some ways, this is the easiest part of losing Greg. When we're here, we're all here together. But no doubt we will all have our individual moments alone, and when we reckon with his legacy. So, to Greg Seitz, and the impact that he had on all of us.
To Greg. Tanner, you ready? Introduce yourself.
I'm Tanner. I used to cut with Greg, and I ended up living with him for a couple years, but I'll get to that later. Well, where to start? Greg and now hold on. I had heard about this guy called the Hungry Beaver from Jeff Cahill and Mark Vandermeer. It was my first quote-unquote logging job, and I wanted to know what to expect, so I said, "What's the Hungry Beaver like?" Mark said he was a fruitcake. Jeff didn't know him well at the time, but he said, "Tanner, we need a pro on this job because you don't know what the fuck you're doing. This guy's going to straighten you out. Just listen to the beaver." Well, the beaver showed up 2 hours late to the first day of work. This would later become a theme. He raced out there in his little blue Tacoma and skidded into the landing in a cloud of dust. This little bald-headed guy with speed dealer sunglasses hopped out, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Do you like Jethro Tull?" I said, "Are you the Hungry Beaver?" At that moment, he walked past me and examined a 2-foot log that I had left laying on the ground. He proclaimed, "Is this your work?" I said yes, at which point the beaver launched into a 30-minute diatribe about the value of low stumping, bored feet, and of all things, efficiency. I just stood there befuddled. Efficiency, I thought. This guy just showed up 2 hours late. Who the hell is this guy? I would soon find out. The hungry beaver turned around, fired up his saw, and outcut me 4-1 the whole rest of the day. Later on, the beaver and I became very close, and I got to know him intimately, and what I realized very quickly was to never go to him for dating advice. For all the studying that he had done on young women, his philosophies sucked. When I asked him about his dating life, he said that he liked cutting with an extra loud chainsaw because it really put the vibe out there. I never really figured out what vibe he was talking about. In case you guys in the back haven't picked up on it, Greg was the hungry beaver. Greg was a lover of YouTube, which is probably where he got most of his working knowledge on everything. You guys should have seen the way he attacked his backed up sewer lines. During the early days of the pandemic, I was on a 2-week bender at my parents' house and made everyone sit down as a family to watch Greg's infamous YouTube documentary, Ski to Canada, or Traversing the Bob Marshall and Glacier. I guess he couldn't pick just one title. I decided to subscribe to @GS East Missoula after watching the epic film and got a call within 5 minutes from Greg. Greg? Thank you for subscribing, Tanner! I had the pleasure of living with Greg for 2 years, and in that time, I never saw him turn on his stove. His diet was mostly relegated to Bonner Airport tuna clubs, my girlfriend's Ben & Jerry's Chunky Monkey ice cream, Costco seltzer water, and his all-time favorite, Taco John's potato olays. We stayed up late many nights together watching each other's favorite movies, which is where I learned that Greg wholeheartedly believed that he was the kid from Prince's video album, Purple Rain. Greg knew exactly whose YouTube channel to go to watch his favorite movie, which is Sometimes a Great Notion, starring Paul Newman and Henry Fonda. If you haven't seen the movie, it's about union loggers in coastal Oregon who go on strike in response to a decreased need for labor. The Stamper family, however, own and operate their own logging business independent of the unions and decide to continue working to supply the mill and the timber shortage. The rest of the town is outraged, and all these guys in the family were so stubborn, just pushing each other so hard, working their asses off day till night to make hay. The whole town fighting against them, and they were just defiant because their family motto was never give an inch. I'll let you guys watch it to see how it ends, but that was the line that Greg spoke to me over and over again. Never give an inch, Tanner. And if you knew Greg, you knew that he could be a stubborn bastard. I once got into an argument with Greg about the ethics of Canadian timber harvesting, and a month later I heard him arguing my side against someone else. A lot of the time it didn't matter what the subject was. If he picked a side, he had his mind made up and he wasn't going to back down. And with me, it was always some shit that I didn't care about, like someone using dynamite to blow up a log jam. What do I care, Greg? But that's who he was. You would think you had beaten him in an argument, and then a month later he would make you shut off your saw because he had 10 new points to take you to task on. He could be that stubborn guy if he needed to be, and I'm sure a few of you have seen that side of him. But when he was on your side, he would fight for you tooth and nail. He would always be your biggest advocate. He would hold you up, check in on you with a phone call, or a surprise visit to your house with a Bonner Airport tuna club. Sometimes he would get more passionate than me about my own issue, but he was just that tenacious, and that's how he lived his life. An old Gregism he would say was, "I'm not your cheerleader, I'm your ally." And he was that for a lot of us. He was a great helper, but more than that, he's one of the best friends that I'll ever have. And I'm sure many of more of you know that side of Greg too. He loved trees and he loved skis. Greg got a kick out of working for nothing up here at Snowball. He didn't care about the pay. He was just all in about cutting his own ski runs up here. He fell in love with this place back in the 90s and he'll never leave. Last summer he was smiling ear to ear telling me about how this was some of the best cutting he'd ever done because he was the first to do it in this little untouched pocket of Montana, and how excited he was to ski it that winter. And boy, did he ski the shit out of this place. So what can you say about that? Greg worked to ski and he skied to live. Greg is going to live on forever in our memories, in our stories, in his YouTube videos, and in all of the big trees he freed and left standing. Oh, all the trees he freed and left standing, and the satiated beavers he left behind. Thank you.
Well done, Tanner. Thank you. I think that pretty much sums it up. Yeah, I think that Greg's arguments were always second to none, right? And, you know, there's a time where I would probably be getting an argument right now with him about this whole proceeding. Greg believed in nature, and there's no doubt about it. And he would stop me from time to time and be yelling my name at the top of his lungs and being like, Mike, look! And I'm like, expecting something really bad about to happen, right? And he's like, nature's happening. Geology's happening, you know, like just at the most random times. So I think we've done a much organized, unnatural, unnature type talking today, and that was, there's one more person on our list that we want. Oh, make that two now. Claire? So, Claire Vitucci. There's one more after her.
Greg was just a unique individual, of course. He had bizarre boundaries, and but we loved him just for who he was, and he was just someone that showed up for me in my life, and so many times. And I would just encourage you all to take that with you, and thank you all for being here today. It's so important to show up, and it's really what we can do, and I just will always love Greg for that. And he was so proud to be in this space, working here. He really felt like two parts of his lives had come together, the logging and being able to give back to his community, which is Snowball. And I know that was really happy place for him to align. And I just want to read a quick poem by Mary Oliver, How I Go Into the Woods. Ordinarily I go into the woods alone, with not a single friend, for they are all smilers and talkers, and therefore unsuitable. I don't really want to be witnessed talking to the catbirds or hugging the old black oak tree. I have my way of praying, as no doubt you have yours. Besides, when I am alone, I can become invisible. I can sit on top of a dune, as motionless as an uprise of weeds, until the foxes run by, unconcerned. I can hear the almost unhearable sound of the roses singing. If you have ever gone into the woods with me, I must love you very much. And I think, all of us have had really lovely adventures with Greg, and he was so great to share that. We'll have so many memories for which we're really grateful. And then, sorry, because I'm nervous. No, I'm not going to do it. But these are prayer ties that my family brings, and I just wanted to bring them here. And they stand for the different directions, the first four colors, and also the four stages of life, and then water and earth. And there's a little buffalo fur here and some owl feathers, because, Anyway, thank you all, and Greg, we miss you.
Thank you, Claire. So, we're not done. The PA system will remain. There's a PA down below. We have hired a wonderful bagpiper. His name is Rob Lang. We really appreciate him coming here, and I'm also very respectful of his time, and he has some chickens that he has to protect with his life. We want to leave you with a list of things, of Greg things. And Maggie? And then we're going to close with some bagpipes. And like I said, we're not going anywhere. If anybody wants to stay, tell stories, up here, there will be food. Come back up, bring a beer, stay down below. But yeah, here you go. My partner, Maggie.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Maggie, Mike's partner. I'm also not very great at speaking, so my voice will be shaky, and I probably have pit stains, but that's fine. It's also really hot, so these are lessons from Greg. Love what you do. Find something you're passionate about and be all in. When things don't go according to plan, that's when the adventure begins. The more chaotic, the better. There's always room for dessert. Any day on skis is a good day. When mountain biking and also in life, look at where you're going. Don't get too focused on what's right in front of you. Apparently, gas station food is edible and optimal for a day to fuel a day in the woods. Something called a breakfast pumper. The best place for said gas station food wrappers is on the floor of your car. Chewing gum can help you focus while skiing or biking. The weirder the flavors, the better. We are all one wreck or accident away from needing adapted recreation. That's why it's important to be inclusive when it comes to adventure. One day it could be you. Laugh often and laugh loud. Be true to yourself and your beliefs. Be proud of who you are. Own your mistakes and apologize when it's warranted. You never know what someone... Oh no. I didn't screenshot the rest. Oh crap. Normally I would print paper, but we don't have a printer. Okay, one second. You never know what someone's going through or their past, so treat everyone with kindness. And there's always room in life for the people you love.
There's always also room for dessert. All right. So I wrote this. It ended up in the obituary. It was something that I thought of while I was painting trees in a watercolor class the Tuesday after he passed. And I'm pretty sure it was something Greg had said to me, and that's where it rung true. When a big tree falls in the forest, it leaves a very large hole in the canopy above. It may have taken that tree a century to grow, to outcompete others in order to fill the void left by its predecessor. Greg was a big tree. His branches reached far into the spaces around him, and his roots deep into the soil. He offered shade for the understory below, stood strong against wind, planted seeds for future generations, and ultimately died to create nourishment and create space for his legacy here at Montana Snowball. He has left this community a large hole to fill, but has created space for all of us to grow in his absence. Miss you, Greg. Take it away, Rob.
Dr. Sickle.